am routinely in blogs and even in mainstream newspapers, if the National Post can be so described. That surely must be the worst newspaper in the English language today. I am routinely smeared as an anti-Semite, and I want to deal with that question full on. I have all of my life been a man of the left. I joined the Labour Party at the age of 13. As a child, I was active at election times with my parents and grandparents in Labour movement events. How could someone like me, a socialist, be against Jews? This is an impossibility. Marx was a Jew. Trotsky was a Jew. Einstein was a Jew. Epstein was a Jew. Joe Slovo, the commander of the African National Congress armed struggle, was a Jew. Dylan is a Jew. Bob Dylan is a Jew. Noam Chomsky is a Jew. How could we possibly be against Jews? We're not against Jews. We're against the racist ideology of Zionism and its practice in the apartheid state of Israel. That's what we are against. There are thousands of Jews in Canada who are marching with us. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world marching for us. There are even thousands of Jews in what they call Israel itself who are with us in this cause. We are not guilty of any form of racism. In fact, the people who accuse us of racism have a far more questionable record themselves on these questions. And we will not be intimidated. We refuse to be intimidated out of our right to criticize Zionism and Israel by this foul smear. When people wanted, many of them in today's government, no doubt, to destroy communism in Russia, it didn't mean they wanted to destroy the Russian people. It didn't mean they wanted to destroy Russia as a country. It meant they were against the political ideology of communism and they wanted to see it end. Well, we are against the political ideology of Zionism, and yes, we want to see it end. And we want to see it end for the Palestinian people. We want to see it end for the people of the region in which Israel currently sits. And we want to see it end for the people also, because we believe that Zionism is itself a racist ideology. It's racist, first of all, against Jews, because it accepts the anti-Semites' argument that a Canadian Jew isn't really Canadian, that a British or French Jew isn't really British or French, that they must leave their countries in which they and their forefathers maybe for centuries have lived and go to the shores of the Mediterranean and live in somebody else's country. It's racist towards the Palestinians because it renders them second-class citizens inside what is officially described as a Jewish state, even though 25% of the people of the state are not Jews, and 3 million Palestinians are living under the occupation of that state, not as second-class or even third-class people, but as an occupied people for more than 40 years. It is racist towards the rest of us, because it means that all of us are just waiting to fall upon in some pogrom the Jews in our midst. This is a poisonous ideology. It poisoned the well of the Jewish people in Europe, who before Zionism became hegemonic were the avant-garde of all progressive politics and society. The leaders of the socialist movement, the leaders of trade unions, the leaders of progressive thought, the avant-garde, the very best of Europeans, represented, yes, by Marx and others. And it has turned the world's picture of Jewishness into the picture of Ariel Sharon, Olmert, Barak and Netanyahu. This is a crime against the Jewish people as well as a crime against the Palestinians and others. Let me say something you probably don't know. I was one of the very few people on the left under apartheid South Africa who was sent into the country whilst apartheid ruled, whilst Mandela was in the dungeons, to work underground on behalf of the ANC. Every house in which I lived, every car in which I travelled, every dinner that I ate, every penny that I spent was provided by Jewish members of the African National Congress. Jews don't have to be with apartheid. They don't have to be with the oppressor. In South Africa, they were not. Jews like Dylan and the thousands in our midst in this movement in Canada are not. And we must never, ever forget that. We are the people who really represent the demand for human rights and for freedom and liberation of occupied people. You see, the adversaries we have are very, very choosy about whose freedom they're ready to support, which democracy they're ready to support. We're fighting in Iraq, not you, but we, fighting in Iraq for democracy, whilst our best friend next door in Saudi Arabia has no freedom or democracy of any kind. We're fighting for democracy in Afghanistan, whilst the Palestinians are being starved and besieged because they voted in the only free and fair democratic election ever held in any Arab country ever in history, the problem being that they voted the wrong way. But more of that later. First, I want to deal with the subject of Afghanistan. I see your government has broken another promise. They promised the families of the military that they would be withdrawing from Afghanistan. They promised the military themselves that this was their last tour of duty. They broke that promise, although you're only staying as trainers. Does nobody in Canada ever ask, how come the Afghan army needs quite so much training? We've been training them for almost 10 years, for longer than the First and Second World Wars put together. Nobody's training the Taliban, and they're doing quite well, it would appear. But you know how much we're spending training Karzai's army? I'll have to say this twice, because the first time you'll think you misheard it. The training budget for Karzai's armed forces, paid for by Western taxpayers, including you, is $1 billion a month. $1 billion a month, with no noticeable improvement in 10 years in their performance. In fact, exactly, the pensioners are going cold in the winter while we're spending billions setting fire to other people's countries. That's the reality of our economic and political system. In my country of Scotland, pensioners are more likely to die of hypothermia in the winter than any place else in the world, including Siberia, whilst we have unlimited money to go around the world setting fire to pensioners in other people's countries. But that's a digression. I want to get back to the $1 billion a month training budget. According to the United States government, last year, fully 35% of all the people we've trained disappear out the back door and join the Taliban. 35%. Apparently the wages are better. Well, you can understand it. Once Karzai has had his cut, his drug-dealing brother has had his cut, the warlords have had their cut, well, there's not enough left to pay the infantry. So 35% of them disappear and join the Taliban. This war has been doomed from the start. No one has ever successfully occupied Afghanistan. Not even Alexander the Great. And Mr. Harper, you ain't no Alexander the Great. You ain't. In fact, we're so desperate now to leave, we're so desperate to find somebody, anybody, to negotiate our withdrawal with, that the other day, a shopkeeper, a grocer from Quetta in Pakistan, showed up and said, I'm a leader of the Taliban. He met General McChrystal. They flew him to Kabul to meet President Karzai. They filled his pockets with $400,000. They gave him diamonds for all 4 of his wives. He came back 3 times. He really won the lottery, that guy. And it was only on the 3rd occasion, when they were getting down to negotiate our withdrawal with him, that somebody who knew the person he was claiming to be recognized that he was an imposter. Well, nice try, guys. But we really are going to have to find the real Taliban, and we really are going to have to negotiate our withdrawal from the country with them. And the only reason you're staying there for another 4 years is to provide political cover for the British and American governments whilst they negotiate that withdrawal. That's the truth. But in those 4 years, your young men who've already paid a higher price than any other contingent in this occupation, as a proportion of the numbers you have there, you've lost more dead and wounded than anybody else, will be anything but safe. Mr. Harper says, well, they won't be in Kandahar, they'll be in the safety of Kabul. He's obviously not seen the news bulletins from Kabul over the last few months. He says that they'll be safer because they're behind barbed wire. Well, from what I can see, it takes a lot more than barbed wire to be safe from those now rising in ever greater numbers against the foreign occupation of their country. That's why the people are fighting. This deliberate conflation in the Canadian media and amongst the political class